Hey leaders, I'm excited to be attending the Scale with Stability Summit this April 24th through the 26th at Harding University, and I would love for you to join me. Many of my clients are attending. This event is designed for faith-driven entrepreneurs and business owners looking to scale their businesses without stress or burnout. And right now, you can get an extra 20% off with my exclusive code Catalytic20 at checkout. Visit scalewithstability.com to grab your ticket. I'll hope to see you there.
It is a real honor today to have Stuart Sorkin on the podcast. Stuart focuses on helping business owners preserve wealth, protect their legacy, and achieve seamless transitions. A CPA, attorney, and entrepreneur with 4 decades of experience in tax law, Stuart integrates legal, tax, estate, and M&A strategies into one comprehensive plan. As founder of the Business and Legal Advisors, he aligns clients' personal financial goals with effective growth and succession strategies. Stuart holds an accounting and finance degree from American University, a law degree from the University of Miami, and an LLM in taxation from Georgetown University. He also co-authored Expensive Mistakes When Buying and Selling Companies and How to Avoid Them in Your Deal. Stuart, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to our conversation today.
I do as well.
Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
I'd love to start with you sharing a little bit of your story with our listeners, Stuart, particularly around your journey and your development as a leader. How did you get started?
Well, I was born and raised in Chicago, 5 blocks from Wrigley Field, which probably makes me an eternal optimist.
For a long, long time, I get it. I'm a Cowboys fan, so I can.
You can relate. My father was a real estate entrepreneur, was a real estate developer and entrepreneur. I started working in his office in high school, in college. I then clerked for my father's law firm, where I learned what it was like to put deals together as an attorney, and decided that this is where I felt I could have great impact. Got my accounting degree, got my CPA while I was in law school. And in law, chose the University of Miami because it was one of the few programs in the country where you could take courses in the Master's in Tax program while in the JD program. So I loaded up in tax courses there, and then got my LLM from Georgetown, because it ended up when I started at GW, they didn't have enough courses that I didn't have before that I wouldn't be repeating.
Oh, my goodness. That's awesome.
And I started my career working for Arthur Anderson in their local tax department in 1981, when the 1981 Tax Act came about, and started playing around with the early incarnations of PCs in tax planning. And then was hired by Coopers & Lybrand in 1983 to build their tax application software division, which in 4 years, I grew to an apartment of 13 people, which means I have the unique experience that I've actually an attorney and a CPA who's actually built a business and knows what it's like to deal with deadlines, employees, growth issues, and other things. So it allowed me a very different experience. And then I also, when I left there, I went to work for a large Louisville-based law firm in D.C., and ended up spending the better part of a year and a half commuting to Dallas, buying failing S&Ls and banks under the Southwest Plan in the late 80s. Developed my own models for analyzing bad debts, real estate owned, etc. Left that firm, went to a meltdown when the principal proponent of the Washington office passed away unexpectedly. Went to work for a boutique securities firm where I wrote business plans and Reg D offerings. That firm had its own set of issues and ended up going back with the real estate business arm of the Louisville firm, where I did M&A, estate planning, corporate work. And then in 1993, I got divorced and ended up with primary custody of 2 children, and moved my practice at home, where all of my partners had spread to the wind to various firms. And I was of counsel to 13 firms at one point where I was doing tax planning, estate planning, corporate planning, etc. When I went back to rebuild my practice, after my son went off to college, I met my co-author, Dick Stiglitz, at a men's communications group and helped him sell his government contracting business for $25 million, where part of the transaction was I was the trustee of the trust that owned the majority of the company. Unique situation. And then Dick and I decided as a give back to write Expensive Mistakes, which came out in January of 2010, the first month the baby boomers hit 65. And I'm proud to say it still has 4.6 stars on Amazon today.
That's awesome.
So I work with the concepts that I work with is that what makes most entrepreneurs successful is their belief in themselves, which makes building a succession plan for them extremely difficult because they're no longer the smartest man in the room and they have to learn to delegate.
Always a challenge.
Understanding the ideas of, okay, what are you going to, when you are building your business, you're going to sell you are going to exit your business in one of 6 ways and only one of 6 ways. You're going to sell it to family. You're going to sell it to management. You're going to sell it to a third party. You become an absentee owner. It gets liquidated or you die. If you don't choose one of the first 4, the last 2 will happen. However, the best way to always sell a business is as an absentee owner, because the one thing when you sell the business is you're not there. So if the business can run without you, then you are capable of having a business. You maximize the value of your business.
That's so true.
And so looking at the issues of how do you maximize, first, where's your business at today compared to where you need to be? If you are looking at an exit in 5, 7 years, you need to start planning now. Exit strategy takes a chunk of time. And the first question you need to figure out is, what is it that you need from the business? What are you looking for? You need to meet with a financial plan. Succession planning is a team sport. You need to meet with a financial planner to find out what your number is, to know, how are you going to have a successful retirement? Financial firms are really good at that, but I'll tell you a story real quickly about how it can fall apart. And that is, a client called me back, 8-10 years ago, screaming at me saying, you told me when I sold my business, I would never run out of money if I work with these financial planners. And they said, and now they're telling me I got to cut my expenses by 20%. What happened? And I calmly said to him, well, it would have been really helpful if you told the financial planners your love for Italian sports cars and that you were going to buy 3 of them at over $300,000 a shot in the first year.
Context is king.
So you need, when you are actually doing this kind of financial planning, you need to be honest. What are you going to do? Also, what are you going to do when you're not working anymore? I've seen some very unhappy sellers who hadn't figured out an exit. They need to figure that out. They need to figure, and once they figure that out also, if they're a serial entrepreneur, do we need to do some planning now to take some chips off the table in case the next deal doesn't work so well? What have they done with regard to their estate planning? Do they have kids in the business and kids outside the business? How are they going to equalize? Or do they have family? And then if you're not where you need to be, if your business isn't supporting the number you need, how are you going to get there? Can you do it through internal growth, or do you have to become a strategic acquirer? And if you're going to become a strategic acquirer, what are you going to acquire? Because acquisition for the sake of acquisition doesn't necessarily add value to your business. How are you going to integrate this process? How are you going to you're going to need to build your own due diligence checklist that a bank's going to want to see to finance any deal. You're going to have to build a due diligence checklist to make sure that you can integrate any acquisition you have. And how are you going to pay for this? How are you going to pay for this acquisition? Are you going to do it with borrowed money? Are you going to do it with internally generated cash? Can you potentially do it with some form of equity? These are all things you need to think about if you're looking at growth through acquisition. But probably one of the things that I find most distressing, or one of the big problems that I tend to see, is partners who have stopped rowing the boat in the same direction. Mm-hmm. They're partners for several years, and they're going along, and one partner is growing this thing to sell in 5 years, and the other one looks at this as a lifestyle business. They're making decisions potentially that are contrary to one another. So one of the most important things that I think is important is to make sure that the partners have built consensus around the 5-year plan or the 3-year. Because if you don't have consensus there, you're not going to be able to create measurable, achievable goals with accountabilities for yourselves as the founders or for your employees.
As people are coming to you, your experience is much broader and deeper than a lot of people that I talk to. I mean, not only just from the law and the CPA, the tax, the M&A, so many different facets of what you bring to the table. When people come to you, what are some of the things that you find are the most important steps or traits that they need to have as they're coming to you to talk about succession? What are some things that they can begin prepping now, whether that's, in their mindset, the way they're looking at things, whether it's tactically or strategically?
I think there are a couple of things.
I want to take a minute to tell you about an event that I'm really looking forward to and excited about. The Scale with Stability Summit, happening April 24th through 26th at Harding University. This is Arkansas's #1 business growth event, bringing together faith-driven entrepreneurs and business leaders who want to scale their businesses without sacrificing their faith, family, or sanity. You'll hear from incredible speakers, including Damon John from Shark Tank, Kevin Harrington, the original shark, and Willie Robertson from Duck Commander, plus some of the best business minds in leadership, marketing, and growth. I'll be there, and many of my clients are attending as well. Right now, standard tickets are already 25% off, and as a listener of the Catalytic Leadership Podcast, you get an extra 20% off with my code Catalytic20. Go to scalewithstability.com and secure your ticket today. I would love to see you there.
First, are you structured correctly? Because since 2017 Tax Act, there is a significant difference in the taxation of corporations versus C corporations versus S corporations or LLCs, taxes partnership, because C corporations have a 21% tax rate and deductible state income taxes. LLCs and S corps, the individuals are taxed at their rates, which are 37 plus non-deductible state income taxes. And with a lot of companies, the founders are keeping a chunk of money in the company and only taking out the money they need to pay taxes. Well, that means they're paying 16% more in taxes to have that privilege. Another issue along the same lines is that most the people are concerned about, quote, double taxation when moving to a C Corp. Well, as we talked about, there are 4 ways you're going to sell your business properly: family, management, absentee owner, or third party. In everyone except for the third party sale, they're generally going to be a stock deal, not an asset deal. Therefore, you don't have the necessary problem of the double taxation that people worry about when they sell their business to family or management or become an absentee owner. And the idea here is that you can then also use the C corporation, because a lot of times in the transfers from management and family, one shortfall usually is how much money does the founder end up taking? Because on one hand, he wants to take out as much as possible. On the other hand, if he's forcing his employees or family to take out a large bank loan to pay him back, then he may be hurting the overall success of the business. The concept here is that we could deal with this in 2 ways. One, the founder, if he is making more money than he technically needs now, can set up a non-qualified deferred comp plan within the C corporation, which means that any money that stays in the C corporation, approximately 75%, can be reinvested versus 60% or less that could be reinvested on the individual level. On top of which, any earnings would also be taxed at a lower rate. But with a C corporation, you would pick up an additional advantage that a C corporation that invests in publicly traded stocks gets a 50% dividend exclusion, which means the tax rate on reinvested income in a corporation that holds stock is 10.5%.
Wow.
So the idea of building up this cash in the business and as a non-qualified deferred comp plan initially, with the concept that the management or family will buy just a couple of shares from you and the remainder of the stock will be redeemed by the corporation, which means that the corporation will be able to redeem you with cheaper tax dollars based on cheaper earnings. So this is one area to look at. Another area that I think is, as we talked about, delegation. You have to create a management. If you're going to leave, you got to create a management team. Well, once you create a management team, how are you going to ensure that they stay or that they don't get greedy when the acquirer comes and says, "Oh, I want this guy," and you don't have him locked down to a deal? It could cost you a lot of money to make that deal work, or the deal could actually blow up. So the idea of figuring out the best way to golden handcuff key employees once you have them as part of your business is important. And one of the other things that I think is a discipline that needs to happen is most founders need to figure out exactly all of the things they do that no one else does. Then what I suggest is when they're building this out is they take a list across the top of a piece of paper, all of those duties. They divide those in half. And I'll explain that in a second. Along the other axis, they list their employees. First question is, who is the best person to train? The second question is, who is the person you most would like to train? Because I have seen situations where the CEO doesn't necessarily get along well with the CFO. So greatest excuse for avoiding delegation is I don't like training him, or the training doesn't happen because I don't like working with him. So right. I'm a big believer that you may take the B person who's from the training standpoint if he is the better person that you're going to want to train.
That's really good. How often do people come to you thinking they're ready for succession? They're ready for this. And you look at their structure and their systems, and you tell them, you're not even close. You're at the center of the spider web. Everything connects to you. If we pull you out, you don't have a business. How often does that happen?
And that was one question I forgot to add before early that's key, which is, what happens after this meeting if you get hit by a bus to your business? What is your disaster plan? And if you don't have a disaster plan for that, that's a real problem.
In my experience, that is not uncommon. No. For people not to have a plan for this. Entrepreneurs, they kick that can down the field.
Right. And, there are multiple ways of dealing with it that people don't even think about. And that I'll give you a quick example. I had a client who had a successful business. He had developed cancer. He went into remission, but he was concerned that he would go back and and he had 2 key employees. He knew those key employees didn't want to buy him out, but he knew he needed them for the business. So what we did was we set up an agreement that's an employment agreement with each of these key guys that said, we're going to pay you all this compensation. However, if I make a planned or unplanned exit from this business, you will stay for 12 months. And in exchange for that, I'm going to pay you a bonus equal to, let's say, 50% of your W-2 income as a way to ensure that there's transferable value. So the idea of looking at that as something to consider. Here's another thing is your business going to need capital to grow? If you're going to need capital to grow, it's very hard to raise capital for an S corporation because an S corporation can only have one class of stock. And I don't know a lot of investors who don't want to have a liquidation preference if they're investing in your business. Also, smart investors are concerned, one, that they'll get hit with phantom income because you won't distribute enough cash to them to pay the tax liability on your growth. But the other side of the coin is they realize that growing the business is being crimped by having to pay out 40% of the cash to pay the investors' taxes versus having them as a stockholder and they get dividends, which are tax advantaged, and you can tie dividends to profitability. So they only pay taxes when they get money. Investors tend to like that.
Indeed. Most of us do.
And another issue is that's also come into play recently is covenants not to compete. A lot of businesses don't need covenants not to compete. They can survive very well with having their employees bound by, non-solicitation of employees and clients. But there are some businesses where a covenant not to compete is really important. And today, the only way you can get a legitimate covenant not to compete is on the transfer of equity, of stock. So the idea of creating an employee class of equity that says, hey, you're my partner, you're going to grow with me, but if you leave, 20% of the purchase price is going to be paid to a covenant not to compete that's going to be paid out over the covenant period. That's perfectly enforceable. And the idea here is that if you do it right, you're also going to cut, in a normal situation, a change in control bonus for the employee is generally going to be all ordinary income. If you do this right, 80% of it is capital gains. You've just saved the employee a ton of money. So by saving him a ton of money, you can say, okay, when we sell, you're getting 20% at closing. You're getting 60% at the earlier of 1 year after acquisition or 30 days after constructive termination, change your job title, move you, etc. And 20% in the covenant not to compete. You have now delivered to the acquirer an intact management team for 1 year with a non-compete for a second year. I would say in most cases, the acquirer would pay you a lot more money for that.
Rightly so.
So it's looking at these kinds of things in, another reason potentially is, let's say you decide you want to sell to your employees and you want to do an ESOP. A C corporation as an ESOP means you may never pay taxes on the sale of your business, because if you sell to an ESOP, you then can take and reinvest in what are known as qualified securities, which is basically any publicly traded stock. And you do not pay taxes on the sale of your business till you sell the underlying stock. If you don't need that stock to live on while you're alive, you can pass that stock onto your descendants, and they get a step up in basis when you die. So they sell your business and pay no taxes on it.
And this is why the expertise you bring is so highly sought after and so valuable. I'm curious, Stuart, you have to lead your clients, your business at a different level today than you did 5 or 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And that same thing is going to be true 3, 4, 5 years from now.
Which is why I'm now looking at AI as one of the things that I'm starting to work with a little bit.
So how do you level up your skills? Like, how do you stay on top of your game so you can serve your clients at the level that you want to and commit to?
One, there isn't a day that goes by that I try not to learn something.
I love that.
That believe also there is no such thing as a mistake as long as you learn from it.
Yes.
And doing this for 40 years, I can show you the scars on my back from the mistakes I've made, but I probably learned from all of them.
That's so good.
And it's the concept of also, as I said, I'm now using AI to balance out and check out my recommendations. I've programmed in my stuff, and I have working on other M&A experts programming it in to be able to give a more complete package to clients. And it's, as I said, it's also the integration issue of, have you integrated? I've seen great succession plans from a business standpoint that completely fail from a family standpoint. And I've seen family transactions that have failed because they haven't done the proper planning from the estate standpoint.
Sorry.
So you have situations where, as an example, this is that family is in the business and outside the business. How do you equalize if you only have some of the family in the business? Some of that's through cash, some of that, but the one thing you don't want to do is you do not want to put children in a debtor-creditor or landlord-tenant situation that could negatively impact the business generally. It's usually found. So as an example, generally you would not, the idea is that if you sell the business to a child, that maybe you give the other children a first out equal to the value of the business before you allocate the remainder. You also may have a situation where you say, well, all the kids can participate in the real estate. Well, that's fine, except that means the kids could possibly force let's put it this way. The lease would generally have either a right of first refusal or a right of first offer. The right of first refusal means the children who are not in the business probably will never be able to sell the real estate, because who's going to make an offer and do the due diligence to investigate buying a piece of real estate that they know someone can then match their offer and take it from them?
This is true.
Which is why in family deals, I'm a big believer in what's known as a right of first offer, which says children who are not in the business say, hey, brother, we love you, but we want to cash out. Fine. We have the property appraised. Son who owns the business has a right to buy the real estate at between 90 and 95% of appraised value, because there's no broker. That's a quick transaction. But if he doesn't do it, then the family can sell it to whoever they want. So you're giving the family member a first right to protect themselves, but you're not locking in the non-business family members into a piece of real estate for 40 years that they can't get out of.
Love that. So you are a continual learner.
Yes.
You are always wanting to learn and grow. And I think your steps in foray into AI are just an example of that. Is there a book that has made a really big difference in your journey that you would recommend to the leaders who are listening?
I love Turning Point.
It's a great book.
Malcolm Gladwell and Turning Point. Think just like there will be people that there will be a similar turning point as there is with hockey, as there was with PCs, that those born between 53 and 56 were the ones who really became predominant. You will see the same things as those who are probably in their early 20s today who are messing with AI, that generation, that there'll be a 2 or 3 year period of those people will be the prime movers, because the older people won't want to deal with it, and the younger, and by the time the younger people get involved, they'll already be more established.
That's so good. Agree. Stuart, I know people are going to want to continue to learn from you and more about what you do. If they want to reach out and talk about how you can help what they're building or exiting from, thinking about succession and so many of the other things we've talked about, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
They can go on my website, and there are videos, there are podcasts, there are white papers on the subject, and they can also set up I do complimentary meetings with all initial clients, because most of my clients don't know what they don't know about building a succession plan. And what Cy Sims said a long time ago is true: an educated consumer is my best customer.
Love that.
But here's the other point, is that to make these efficient, I have a 2-page questionnaire that I ask the client to fill out that tells me a little bit about the business before I do the complimentary call, so I can actually give him some value rather than sitting on the call, learning about the business and not being able to react to it. So I try to make these, and then usually I follow up the complimentary consultation with some white papers on the subjects we've covered, and then we'll do a follow-up meeting with the client if they want to, before they decide if they're going to engage.
Love that. We will put a link.
If they engage, then they will engage me for an initial project, which would be a fixed fee for me to evaluate their business. And I basically have a due diligence checklist that I ask them to send me documents on, so I can make some understandings about the business and then come up with a set of recommendations of how I think would best make it work.
Well, I will put a link to all of that in the show notes so people can reach out and connect with you.
That'd be great.
Stuart, I'm so grateful for your time today and your generosity in sharing from your decades of expertise in a subject that is incredibly important to entrepreneurs who are looking at succession, who are looking at exit, and the steps they need to take now, what they need to be thinking about now. Thank you so much for sharing today.
I'd like to throw one last thing out, one statistic, and that is that in 2030, the Gen X 65, the projected the market value of succession planning between now and 2040 is somewhere between 35 and 70 trillion dollars. And if you consider the entire GNP is only $26 trillion, that shows you of what's going to happen over the next couple of years, over the next 15 years. And it's going to make or break the success of the American economy, that transition.
Let's do it right.
Exactly.
Stuart, thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do 2 things.
First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.
If today's episode resonated with you, you need to be at the Scale with Stability Summit this April. I'll be there, along with many of my clients. This event is packed with real strategies to help you scale without losing what matters most. Standard tickets are already 25% off, and you can take an extra 20% off with code Catalytic20 at checkout. Go to scalewithstability.com now to lock in your spot. I'd love to see you there.